Hey guys, and welcome to another new exciting video where I'm going to be documenting some painting from life. This is referred to as en-plein, or the French term for open air painting. Now before I begin, I just wanted to mention I'd previously worked in this fashion. However, it's been many years since I took on this challenge outside of my studio comforts, and now I'm really inspired to get back into the outdoor elements. There is something so magical and real about this process, including the struggles and mishaps that make this all the more challenging. So with this new style of video content, I wanted to share with you my journey into getting back into my painting. Once you are there in the open world that's constantly changing, it can be so overwhelming in finding a sense of scene and deciding on where and how this painting shall be created. And after a short walk along the bank at Cransley Reservoir, I had found the perfect combination of land, water and background all hidden beside some trees. So now I had to capture my initial vision with a rough pencil sketch to kick things off. And if you are used to working from photography for your painting or drawing, you definitely need to give this a go, as it's a very humbling experience. Here I'm using watercolour as my medium of choice due to its spontaneity and just how easy it is to travel with. I'm using a wet on wet approach where I make the paper wet before adding my colour washes. And with this technique you can really create some beautifully freeing effects that let the medium do its magic. And over the recent few weeks I've really poured hours into my watercolour work, and I really aim to cultivate my skills in this medium for something so exciting in the next few weeks to come. So I'm starting with some Prussian blue to create that beautiful water bleed effect. And I begin by softening that effect by gently wiping away the paintbrush at an angle. Here I'm really looking to work back to front, starting with my sky and then moving into my background. Now one of the biggest challenges of watercolour is how we create highlights. Watercolour is a very transparent medium, so any whites we add have very little opacity or overall effect by itself. So I'm going to use some thicker gouache medium white in this painting to represent much of that light brown grassy area. If you wanted to take your watercolour expertise that step further, you could even use some gum arabic or masking fluid, which in all of my time painting I've never actually tried. And here I'm using a combination of colour pencil and wet watercolour to bring in some very unique grassy textures. Now this is literally my first attempt at en-plein for the longest time I can remember, since I've only ever tried painting like this with oils. So I definitely had pushed myself far out of my comfort zone on this one, but this is the new direction I want these videos to go in. Now in this next clip I begin by trying to capture some of those distant green features, such as the hill, and I actually accidentally add too much colour saturation for my liking. So you'll notice with this next green that I add, it's just way too much of a warm yellowy green, which wasn't what I intended because I wanted a cooler, colder green to represent distances further away. Now I believe there's no real mistakes in painting, however watercolour is one of the mediums that's really not going to let you get away with anything. So later down the line, this is where my white gouache will come to save the day. And here I'm moving into some of the foreground elements with my favourite burnt sienna tones to show warmer, closer objects. And I can't lie, it was near freezing on this day, making this process all the much harder, especially on my hands, and this challenged the willpower that I had to continue painting like this outside. And I was soon humbled that this painting was going to be more of a study than a finished piece out in the field. But I knew I just had to persevere, even if that meant getting back into the studio. So with my photographic reference and warmth back in my hands, let's watch how I developed this scene. Now here is that white gouache that I was talking about, and I'm going to use it as almost like a semi-transparent glaze. This is going to help me not only create more atmospheric distance, but also help to draw in some softer details on top. I then add in some darker forms into the foreground, which will really help to create that illusion of distance in this scene. This also includes adding some sharper definition of tree foliage, contrasting that beautiful softness in the background. Now, as far as experimentation goes, I actually began painting with my colour pencil. This really helps, as I needed something harder than my brushes to drag the gouache around. Once the gouache was dry, I approached this in a similar way to oil painting and washed a warm glaze over my highlights. Once I was happy with what I had achieved in the studio, I took the same painting back out into the location to see if I could add some final key details. I was very impressed by what I had achieved, however most of that was in fact indoors, which kind of bothered me, so I wanted to try this again, even if it was just a small study, fully from life, no photography. So here is the final result on this one, and I can't wait to share with you guys the small little study I created just after. And although this was a quick study, something really magical happened. Even with no detail or descriptive development, some of the textures that I had achieved were just insane. I also want to mention on this day it was freezing with snow on the ground, so perhaps this even changed how the watercolour dried, maybe drying faster. I'm going to be making more content just like this, so please comment and let me know what you guys would like to see, and see you guys in the next one. Thank you.